The student who knows the insight presents itself in a way that renders the distinction between insight and prejudice difficult. Because very often to a prejudiced person, their prejudices are insights. And to a prejudiced person, the negation of their prejudices is the negation of truth. And they think of themselves and their groups in a way like the child. My daddy is right. My mommy is right. My family is right. My neighborhood is right. My school is right. My team is right. And end up cheering for one side or the other, but unable to really take ownership of the pursuit of knowledge and understanding, unable to own up to the problems that are integral to the process of thinking. In other words, if you're being educated, you have the joy of discovery, but also the pain of pulling out false belief. When I think of my transition from high school to college, I went through some years in which I slowly freed myself from the indoctrination which I received from my family and from the setting in which I was raised. I was raised in a family in which the concept of police and law enforcement was an important phenomenon. My father was a policeman. His father was a policeman. His father's father was a policeman. All of my uncles were policemen. My grandfather needed someone to drive him to work once a month to get his check. He came when I was 14 and handed me my driver's license. There was a group that my family was a member of. It was called the Chicago Machine. We knew where the back door was in order to gain an entree into privileges So my father's view of the world was the view of a Chicago policeman. That was reality. And it was filled with stereotypes, filled with narrowness, but seemed to be in possession of truth. So one day I asked my father, on those rare occasions, Dad, where we disagree, what percentage of the time do you think I'm correct and you're wrong? He smiled. And we both know the answer was never. So, each of us now must go through a personal journey in which we either face ourselves as we are and accept the responsibility of reconstructing ourselves continually, of bringing in new information and shifting our view, of learning how to leave one view, one box, and enter into another. C. Wright Mills, the great American sociologist, said there are three kinds of believers for every belief system. Vulgar believers, who are persons who have been learned to uncritically accept this as a point of view, a way of looking at the world. Think of those people who always cheer our side and are uncomfortable with our side being questioned. These people, C. Wright Mills said, don't really understand the very point of view that they defend, because they think in a very superficial, group-oriented way, very emotional, very righteous, but very uncritical. So you could be an uncritical Christian, or you could be an uncritical Muslim, or an uncritical Israeli. Or you could be a critical Israeli, or a critical Christian, or a critical Muslim. And if you're a critical believer, then you are able to admit that your point of view is not the whole of truth and reality. That you have some important insights, no doubt, but some blind spots, and therefore you want to dialogue with people who hold different views so that you can expand your views and approach the world in a richer way. So we have the uncritical believer, and we have the critical believer, and he said there's one other kind to watch out for, and this is the sophistic believer. This is the person who studies the point of view carefully, maybe becomes a scholar, but what defines their particular way of believing is they accept the basic core beliefs, chapter and verse, and defend them against all comers. In other words, they never admit that their belief system is ever wrong. And they're highly skilled, highly articulate in defending that one point of view. And as the sophists of old, they're very often an intellectual gun for rent. And they will defend the Democratic Party if hired by the Democratic Party, or they will defend the Republican Party if hired by the Republican Party, and they will serve as an advisor to show how you can manipulate the vulgar believers in the way you want to manipulate them. So you have the vast masses of people who are vulgar believers. You have the sophistic believers manipulating the masses for vested interest reasons. And then you have the critical, fair-minded believer who sees through those and has a rich and open-minded stance with respect to the world. So each of us can ask for part of our belief system. Do I hold this in a vulgar way? Have I just uncritically accepted this? Never really thought deeply about it. If so, perhaps I'm a vulgar believer. Or do I know a lot about this, but never really questioned it deeply? And what I learned to do is how to defend. I was raised in the church, and in the back of the church there were pamphlets. And the pamphlets told you how to defend the faith. So if somebody questions you on this, here's the answer. If somebody objects to that, here's the answer. So the questions and the answers were provided, so you could take them, read them, and defend the faith. But none of the pamphlets were about in what areas are we wrong? In what areas have we violated what we say we believe? To what extent are we really living up to the ideals which we claim to be ours? So that each of us then, if C. Wright Mills is correct, are a combination of three voices. The voice of the mass, conformity, going along with the group. The voice of the critic but defender of the way we live. And finally, the fair-minded believer who is progressively seeking to identify other fair-minded, critical believers to dialogue with.